Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center, sponsored by Fieldstone Communities on Bainbridge Island. Fieldstone offers innovative and compassionate care, now accepting residents. They also offer day stay and respite programs. Call 360-689-4314 to schedule a tour of Fieldstone's beautifully appointed apartments on Rolling Bay today. And we would also like to acknowledge that we are, most of us, living and working on the ancestral homelands of the Suquamish people, the people of the clear salt water, who have been custodians and faithful water protectors for millennia. And we really honor them for their generosity and their amazing cultural practices, which allow them to be amazingly gracious to all of us in sharing their property and their traditions with us. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to Something to Talk About. This morning, I have a few things I wanted to kind of bring out for you. It's a combination of gardening and, of course, talking about the solstice. But one of the things I wanted to show you is that this morning, we got our first bloom on this really sweet little Christmas cactus that my kids, my grandchildren grew from a piece that was given to them at the senior center this summer. And it really took off and is doing well. And it turns out to be Christmas red, which is kind of fun. And there's also this amazing plant that Rita gave me when it was, how big would you say, Rita? Just a couple inches, right? A really tiny little baby plant. Now it's so big.
Oh, wow.
Right? It's gotten humongous and it's just loaded for bear and it keeps on blooming. And if you're growing these in the house, which is the place you have to, because they're really not hardy. They do fine in any window. They really like an east window with filtered light, like morning light's great, afternoon light's kind of too much for them. And they will bloom and bloom and bloom if you feed them now and again. So they're not just holiday bloomers, but they'll actually bloom several times a year. And I give them, you know, just like a regular organic Dr. Earth, that liquid fertilizer. Rita, you like that stuff too, right?
Yes, it's great. And that plant is 4 years old because it was from my daughter who I'm visiting in California. It was for her 50th birthday party. She had all these flower things and she had like a dozen of them in a tray on a table. And so I gave one to Anne and then I took two with me when I moved to my other daughters, and she's got two as well that are blooming. But that one, I'm just amazed because it was really small. It was really small.
Yeah, it was much smaller than this.
It was smaller than that. Yeah. So they're just awesome. Just love them. And
the flowers look like shrimp. I mean, they're just so beautiful. These wonderful little shapes, and they're sort of semi-translucent, which I love. Also, you know, I have an unheated greenhouse and I've had to bring in some of the more tender plants that are out there, like the begonias. They just collapse. And when it goes to 17, even though it's sheltered kind of, it's not heated enough to protect them. Most of the time the begonias will come back from that, but they'll just melt into slush unless you bring them into the house and you have enough window space for everybody. The other thing I wanted to just talk about a little bit is that when it gets really cold like this, certain plants really have a hard time. And some of them are, for instance, the hardy fuchsias, which last year, a lot of people were calling and telling me, oh no, my hardy fuchsias are all dead. And what happens usually is they'll freeze to the base, especially if they get hit by sun when they're still frozen, but they'll almost invariably come back. So instead of pulling them out, just wait and don't cut them back too soon. If you find that they look really frosted, they probably are, but give them time and wait until maybe March or April and look at the base. And if you see new shoots, then you can cut all the old stuff off. And if you just can't stand looking at it, do a Martha and spray paint them gold or something like that, right? Well, using a non-toxic spray, right? But actually spray them with peanut butter or something and the birds would love that. But yeah, it's better for the plants to have a little time to wait. I also was going to talk about garlic because this is traditionally the day to plant your garlic, but I'm thinking maybe not so much because I don't know about you, but here it's like maybe we got up to 30. I'm not sure yet, but the temperatures are too low and it's not good for soil or people or plants. Yeah, it's 29 not warm enough.
Mhm.
But next week it should warm up again. And when the soil is workable, that's the time you can start planting garlic. And when you break apart your cloves, you can see some of them are really small and some of them are pretty fat. Well, you want to plant the fat ones and use these little guys that are just teeny ones. Those you can, I usually throw these little things into, like if I'm making soup stock or, you know, boiling the bones of a chicken or something like that, you can throw these in whole or just cut them in half, these little bitty guys. And those will add some nice flavor to your broth, but they're not worth peeling because they're too little and fussy. But if you plant the bigger cloves, you will get much bigger garlic heads. And if you plant small ones, they actually tend to grow very small heads with small cloves. So even though it's tempting to use the biggest, fattest ones yourself, you might want to save a handful of them and sow them. And really, planting garlic is about as easy as it gets. It's like my little grandkids used to say, pointy side up, right? You just stick it down an inch or two, don't worry about it. And you'll actually see amazingly soon, the little green shoots will come up and they don't mind the cold. Once they're in there, this is root weather. So they'd be putting on their roots and then starting to send up their shoots. And the shoots are amazingly cold hardy. So you don't have to cover them up or worry about them at all. And, you know, garlic is one of those crops that takes hardly any space, really. So you can stick them in among other things if you have more permanent plantings. I put them in ornamental beds a lot of times because I'm going to be harvesting them probably around the time that I might be, those plants might be expanding quite a bit in late spring or early summer. So also, this is my seed jar, right? And I keep a lot of seeds in here, as you can see. This is a time to start thinking about what you want to be growing next year. And I can't predict the weather. Nobody seems to be able to predict the weather, but often we can actually be planting out the cold hardy greens and things like that, seedlings, as soon as February or March for sure, almost always. Though again, I can't promise. If we get another snowmageddon or something, it's not going to go so well. But a lot of those greens are very cold hardy. And so if you grow them indoors to a few inches, then you harden them off by putting them out for an hour or two every day and then make it a little longer and a little longer. And then you can actually plant them out into your garden and they'll do fine and you get a real jump on the season. And it's, you know, you can get a package of seed for $2. And out of that, you might get 40 plants. Well, maybe you don't need 40 plants, but maybe your neighbor has some seeds that they want to share with you and you could give those seeds to someone else. Or there's a number of places where people are growing food for Helpline, or you could contribute extra plants to Helpline so people can put them in their own gardens. But there's never a lack of places to put plants if you just put your mind to it. Right, Rita? Rita and I have been putting plants in at the senior center and are working on another layer. And I was going to plant some bulbs, but it hasn't been very great weather for that. But I think next week I'll plant them. And the cool thing is bulbs don't keep track of the date. So they don't care really if you plant them in October or September or now, you know, they'll bloom at the right time for the most part. If you waited and you didn't plant your bulbs until March, they would appear quite a bit later and be a little confused. But the next year, they would come back on their own proper schedule and bloom after the cold.
Yeah, I'll be back on the 27th, so I can help you with those.
Oh yeah, we can have a planting party.
Exactly, and hot tea afterwards.
Right? We have a bucket of bulbs to put in at the senior center donated by Dave Webb, which is great.
Great.
I would love to hear if you guys have questions about anything particular, because as you know, I can talk for a really long time, but it's nice if I talk about something you're interested in or want to hear more about. One thing I wanted to talk about, where did I put it, is there's a really lovely book, which, now what did I do with it? I can't find it. But there's a number of Solstice books to look for at the library that are really, really nice and have some charming suggestions for ways to celebrate the solstice. I like to have a bonfire. And in the past years, we had big bonfires in our big house where we had a lot of property. Now I live in the mobile home park, and a big bonfire would probably take out the entire community. So that is contraindicated, right? But I have a little fireball of the kind that a lot of people do. And it's the kind you could have on your patio even. I put, bricks underneath it or put it out on the gravel, and we do a little fire. And I've been collecting wood for it and drying it out in my sun porch for all summer. I got a lot of really nice birch twigs and stems and big chunks of birch wood from the city hall, where they had dropped a lot of their they had dropped their branches, and they dry out beautifully. And boy, that stuff burns really nicely, and it looks so pretty with its white skin. I see somebody named iPad has a hand up. Would you like to have a question or say something?
Hi, Anne. This is Edna Lewis. Well,
Oh, hey,
actually, this is
Edna.
Allison.
Oh,
It's your
wonderful.
old neighbor.
Yeah.
Um,
Hey, Edna.
So Mom has a question. There's a couple of our azaleas where whose leaves all have turned yellow in the last few
Month.
weeks, and not really sure why.
It's an evergreen azalea.
Yeah.
So look at the leaves, because it could be that horrible azalea leaf bug, because they tend to turn the leaves yellow and almost sandy looking. Take a look, and sometimes they're really small, but they tend to suck all the chlorophyll out of the leaves, which leaves them looking yellow and a little limp, and sometimes sort of sand colored. And they're really bad. There's a rhododendron lace bugs and azalea lace bugs, and they are all over the Northwest now. They just started kind of moving in about 10 years ago. And the problem is they're really small, so you don't see them until the damage is done.
Yeah, I think it has.
Yeah, and you need a microscope practically to look at them. But you can usually tell if you turn it over, you might see little eggs on the underside, usually clustered along a vein.
Yes, yes,
yeah.
I see that.
Yeah,
I'm looking at a leaf.
right.
It's kind of frozen, but yes.
Yeah, and the really bad news is if it's early on and they're not too well entrenched, you can use something like neem oil and smother those eggs and smother them out. You cannot; those leaves will not come back. So you can cut the leaves and burn them or put them in the recycle. I wouldn't add them to your compost unless you have a really hot compost pile. But if you put them in the green waste, they do go to a commercial facility that has a very high temperature composting system, and that should take care of them. But the problem is, if they're more widespread than it's pretty difficult, not to say impossible, to really control them. And they have alternate hosts. So you may, spread the neem oil where you see them and chase them off that, but they can easily go to something else like a Pieris or Pyracantha, and wait it out and then come back, or just keep wreaking havoc in other places. They're very hard to get rid of, and I'm really sorry, because in most cases, if it's an advanced situation, the only real cure is shovel pruning, which means you dig up the plant and recycle it.
This freeze won't take care of them.
Well, if it's not too bad, and that's the first sign you've had of it, you might be able to stop it. I would cut all those leaves off, the affected ones, and even if there's an affected branch, maybe prune that off and then spray the rest of it. Not today because it's too darn cold, but next week when it's a little warmer, if it gets up in the 40s, you can spray neem or another one of those horticultural oils that's a smothering agent. Does that make sense?
Try it.
You got to get the undersides too. Years ago at Bainbridge Gardens, we used to sell teat washers, which were for cows, and they were upsprayers. And you could put the horticultural oil in a teat washer and you could upspray pretty well with it, because it's hard to get spray to go under the, but if you don't have that, you kind of have to turn the leaves over and spray the back. Well, that's a lot of work for most gardeners. And to do that and renew it every time it rains or every few weeks, it's a pretty tough task to keep up on. So that, boy, I don't know, Edna, I guess it sort of depends on how much you love that plant. If it's just on one,
It's an old plant.
yeah.
They're old plants, yeah.
Well, and as an old person, I relate to that. But sometimes your best choice is to bite the bullet, replace that plant. And, sometimes when you take out those old plants that are struggling, suddenly you have Kansas, you have this new palette, right? And you can think about what else to put there. And I'll say this, like one thing that we've learned about those lace bugs is they don't like fuzzy leaves. So all those awesome Yakushimanum hybrid rhododendrons, they're good ones to put in because they and they like shade for the most part, or they tolerate a fair amount of shade. They can do with some sun as well, but they don't usually like full afternoon sun, but you probably don't have your azaleas in that kind of situation anyway, right? But some of those little yaks, they're beautiful. And they have this great fuzzy indumentum, it's called. It can be sort of silvery or blue-gray or, deep green or even like tawny. There's some that are like cinnamon colored. They're called teddy bear types. They're beautiful. So,
okay.
Embrace the fuzz and move on.
Well, good suggestions. We'll try to take care of it.
Yeah, sorry, Edna.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but that's kind of how it goes.
Yeah.
It's partly because, climate change has created some different situations for us here. And some of our old favorite plants are just not thriving the way they used to. And so instead of trying to plant the same thing over and over, it's good to kind of take notes about what doesn't seem to be doing well and think about things that might do better. Like one of the things Rita and I planted at the senior center was crepe myrtles, which we have some native species down in the south and east of the country, and a lot of them come from Asia, and the hardiest crosses are being bred in like Nebraska. We used to say they're not hardy in the north, but now they're much hardier, and you'll see them all over Seattle. And actually we've got 4, I think, right, Rita, at the senior center, and we're putting some in at the library too on Bainbridge. And these plants are gorgeous. Some they have beautiful fall color and handsome, attractive foliage in the spring, beautiful flowers, right? And sometimes if it gets really cold, like last year when it got to 17, it killed the buds. So we didn't get bloom this summer, but I think that if we feed them up in the spring, we'll probably get good bloom next year. That makes sense. Come on, you guys, give me some questions so I don't have to sit here and think of things. Laura.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a first-time winter gardener. And so, I've got like, I don't know, like 6 kale plants going. And it's just like amazing. I mean, we were gone for a while and they were getting snowed on and whatever. And we came back and they're fine. They're happy. They look beautiful. Can I really just like let them just be in this snow? And because, I think I saw one of your blurbs was talking about, things taste even better after the first frost. Well, how about after the 15th frost? I mean, so that's kind of where I'm at is just, what do I do and how little can I do?
Well, the good news is you can do very little indeed. I mean, some of those kales are not called Siberian kale by accident, right? It gives you a clue about how much cold they can tolerate, and it's a lot. In northern Scotland too, people actually call their gardens kale yards traditionally, right? Because kale got a lot of people through the winter, and it's a source of, vitamin C and other things in the time when there isn't much else out there. That whole kale family, cabbage, broccoli. My favorite greens in the winter are also the purple sprouting broccolis, which are more like broccolinis. So they don't do a big head, but they do little side shoots, and they're gorgeous. They're kind of fuchsia pink stems and purple little buds. They're so good. If you just leave them indefinitely, they'll bloom and you'll attract, pollinators. But if you pick them before they bloom, which would be now, or all through, usually up until about March. And if one branch gets kind of bloomed out, you can cut it back and the side shoots will develop underneath that and start sprouting again. And in a few weeks or a month or so, you'll get another set of small side shoots. And, for small, if it's just 1 or 2 people, you can pick every couple days and have them going indefinitely. And same with the kale. I do like to keep them fed. If you're asking a plant to produce a lot and you're using it a lot, it's courteous to kind of pay them back a little. And again, I like those Dr. Earth. There's some sort of scratch-in dry formulas, which are great. You can put those in and they'll get watered in or it gets snowed in. Snow is actually a a fertilizer in itself because it captures atmospheric nitrogen and delivers it to the plants. So
Oh.
snow is, they used to call it like the poor farmer's fertilizer, right? Just let it lie. And none of those things like cabbage or kale or Brussels sprouts, leeks, they're not going to get harmed by, I mean, maybe if it went to 20 below, but that seems highly unlikely. Did you have another question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, how often should I give them some food? Like every few weeks or, you
It
know?
really, it's temperature dependent at this time of
Okay.
year. When it's up in the 40s, and they're saying we might even get into the 50s next week, which would be wild. That would be the day to give them a little something. And Rita likes this liquid, Dr. Earth. It's like, what is it, 111 or something like that, Rita?
Yeah, it's 111 and you just mix it up. It's brown. The dogs, if you got dogs, they'll be in there to, smell it. But it really works nice. And I found it at Safeway and at Ace. So it's, it's pretty easy to find. I think there's a date on the bottom sometimes. So you might just want to check that. But it seems to work great on on the things that I've used it on. Yep.
Yeah. And I also use things like liquid kelp. I make a little mixture with like that Dr. Earth stuff and some liquid kelp, which is, it's the fastest growing plant on the planet, really. And it has a lot of growth hormones in it. And it's sludgy, so you want to just shake it up. And sometimes you can use humic acid. You can find liquid humic acid. And I add a little dash of that too, because that's the part of compost that improves soil texture. It's not a nutrient as such, but it's a soil builder. And so even with houseplants, you can put a little bit of that in and help, because houseplants can get really compacted soil, especially as the roots start filling it in. And that kind of fertilizer mix is, it's a combination of nutrition and soil building, and it will really help your indoor plants. And as far as how often, in the winter when it's cold, most outdoor plants don't really need a lot, but plants that we're harvesting all the time, like I said, if there's a thaw and it's kind of a warm day and you can see the ground, you might scratch in a little of that dry stuff or splash in a little of the liquid stuff, and give them a boost maybe once a month, just so that they have something to work on, right? And a handful of nice compost on top of that will help too, because those nutrients, compost has nutritional value, but it's usually not very high in number. So the rain will just gently wash that in, and that's an additional source of feeding. And remember that, just like with trees, the root zone of plants like kale is pretty big. It's not just around the stem. So you want to scratch in an area underneath the rain shadow, I call it, right? Like of the plant, the drip line of the plant is where the water would shed off it. And that's often where the feeding roots are most active.
She was talking about a soil enricher.
Are you talking to Bonnie?
Yeah, she was asking me, she got a phone call, so she was out of the room, so she missed much of what you said and was trying to get me to catch you up. Yeah, she was asking what the soil enricher was, if you could say that again. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I like to use humic acid, and sometimes you can get it granulated. You can often get it as a liquid, a sort of sludgy liquid. And I always add that when I'm making mixtures of different kinds of plant foods or fertilizers indoors and out, because again, it doesn't have a lot of nutritive value on its own, but it's a soil builder that helps build texture in soil. It helps maintain an open quality that allows air in as well. So heavy soils like our clay soils can get really compacted, and even houseplant soils can get compacted by the frequent watering and no aeration, because of course there's no living critter in there, or there better not be, right? In your houseplants, you don't really want worms in your houseplants. It's not a good thing. So to make sure that when you're feeding your houseplants, you're also feeding the soil a little bit is a really good idea. And a lot of times you can just put, I put used tea leaves, and especially coffee grounds, used coffee grounds, pretty high protein, 911. And so that's a good thing to put on, just a little, you don't need a ton, but that way each time you water, some of that will be dumped in there too. And, it's actually a good source of food for your plants. And later on, when should summer ever actually arrive, you can put used coffee grounds around your tomato plants and pepper plants and eggplants and things in that family. And it helps them resist early blight. And it also gives them a real boost of nutrients, which is kind of cool. But for now, in the houseplant department, just a thin scattering. You don't need to dump a cupful on there unless it's a big pot. Spread it out thin and put a little compost on top of that, and your plants will respond very nicely. Somebody asked me earlier this week about, is it time to repot your houseplants? And actually not quite. You want to wait till after the solstice. Today is really the beginning of winter, right? It's the shortest day and the longest night, and it's root time. So this is when plants are doing a lot of root work, and indoors and outside. But it's really been interesting that studies have shown that even indoor plants prefer you to wait a few weeks and get into the middle of January, early February. And that's when they respond better to potting up, or to, transplanting them into larger pots. And you don't want to do it when they're blooming if you can avoid it. I mean, if the cat knocks it over and the pot is broken, fair enough, you got to do something. But otherwise, you want to wait until they're finished blooming. And then you don't feed them heavily. You would feed them again with that 1-1-1, very low mix, so that you're kind of encouraging the whole plant. Barbara?
Yeah, I just had my environmental Debbie Downer perspective about tea. If you're putting tea, a lot of tea bags can contain plastics. And so you want to be sure that you're putting only like safe tea on your plants.
Yeah, loose tea.
Loose tea, yeah.
And I think a lot of us have those tea balls. That's what I usually use. I have a couple different kinds, or some of them are like little sieves almost, right? And you could put the leaves in there.
Right.
Right. And there's other kinds that screw together. But the loose tea is really good for your plants. And even, as soon as it cools off, you don't want to put it on hot, because that could actually burn them. But when they're cool, you can just kind of scatter it around, and it's like it will compost in place in your living room. But yeah, unfortunately, we have to be really aware of microplastics more than ever. I did have a really interesting conversation the other day at City Hall with my friend John Barut, who is a scientist, a researcher, and a master composter. And he and a bunch of his geek friends have been talking about how to compost some of those things that are technically compostable, but they require extremely specific conditions, and very few places can actually do that. Like those sort of new pseudoplastic forks or whatever those things are, that they're really not compostable, right? But there are many things that are. And we had a really fun day at City Hall with a bunch of vendors who have things like birch forks and wooden kinds, and the boxes and cups and things that you can put takeout food in that really do compost nicely. And one of the things I like to remind people is like egg cartons, as long as you take if it has that glossy plasticized piece of paper on the top, usually you can get that off pretty easily. Just take that off. And I'm sorry to say, that's just trash. If it's soft printed and it's not glossy, it's probably just paper, and it's fine. If you can soak it and it absorbs water, it's fine. And then the mushy gray stuff that looks like extruded paper is kind of that. And usually that kind of stuff, that kind of container, once it gets wet, you can rip it in smaller pieces, and that will compost very quickly at home. Or you can put those in your recycle, like your green waste bin. I could recycle too, but I like to put them in the green waste bin, because adding that to the compost stream is actually good, right? One of the coolest things John's friends figured out was that, I guess after an event where they had a great many of those, they're supposed to be compostable cups, but they seem to be, they're either waxed or slightly plasticized. I'm not really sure. Barbara, do you know what those cups are treated with?
No, typically it's a chemical, it's a plastic. So, I mean, unless a cup actually says BPI certified and compostable on it, it goes in landfill.
Well, what they did was they saved up a bunch of those after some event and made these stacks. And then they drilled holes through the whole series, which I can just imagine some power tool guy going, but you could punch that bottom out too, and stack them. And they use them as air vents, putting them into the bottom of new compost heaps. Because the more air that gets in, the hotter and quicker that compost will go. And they discovered when they did that, they got very hot compost with several of these tubes feeding, good size air holes into the base of their compost. And then they found that it really actually got hot enough that it broke everything down, and they didn't find particulate stuff. So maybe
Wow.
those were, those were the waxed cups or something maybe, but they found they didn't get any traces. Rita?
They're gonna delay 3 months what the restaurants have to use, right? So that they can get rid of all their stuff.
Yeah. So
A
they
grace period.
right.
Yeah, a grace period.
Right. Well, the city doesn't want to, it's going to cost the businesses more for
Right.
these containers. And so you don't want to force them to throw out what they have
No.
now.
Exactly.
And so they can just phase in the compliant products as they run out of what they currently have in stock.
I had one other question about this use your own cup thing. Depending on the size of the cup, do you come in and how much coffee do they give you? Like when you're doing your use your own cup thing, I've been thinking about that, and I thought, how's that gonna work?
I've been one of the people that the chamber in the city hired to go out and talk to the restaurant owners.
Right.
So I actually have had this conversation with people in coffee shops, and I've gotten a variety of answers. One is that, first of all, you have to bring a clean cup. They say every now and then somebody will bring in a really funky cup, and it's like,
Right.
sorry, we can't do that. But most of them can eyeball it. I mean, they've been making these beverages forever, so they have a good sense of how big it is. What
They
the
really do.
capacity is.
I took my cup into cups the other day, and I said, I'm not really sure if this is what this is. And he looked at it and said, I think it's about 11 and a half. And when I got home, I measured it with water, and it was 11 and a half ounces. Just like,
Yeah.
Oh,
but
yeah. Because I was
you
thinking
do.
that.
You're right. If you do something often enough, you get a very good sense of it.
Right. So I can take my cup in and get a cappuccino, an 8-ounce double shot cappuccino, and they'll know. Okay.
You can also put them like I have my little to go cup, right? And it's a tall, skinny one. And I was thinking I would put water in it, and then measure 8 ounces and just put a Sharpie and mark it, or a piece of tape or something, and say, this is the 8 ounce, here's the 12 ounce or whatever on the side.
Yeah.
So that would be easy. Barbara?
There are also food grade silicone collapsible cups. Have you ever seen those?
Yeah.
They're made by Stojo. And so it's really easy. You can fit it in your pocket when it's collapsed. But then when you, expand it, it has a rigid plastic ring that gives stability and also protection from the heat. It has a screw-on lid, even with a pop-up, so you can have a hole for your straw if you require a straw for your hot beverages. But best of all, the inside has markings of ounces.
Okay.
So when you drink from it, I think of silicone as tasting like plastic or something. Is it gross?
No, it's food grade. It's not gross at all.
Huh.
It's just
That
more
sounds like-
convenient than a ceramic mug.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Mine is metal, and that's pretty good. I usually rinse it out every time I use it anyway. But yeah, it is true that we have to be a little more mindful about that, because if you bring in, I've heard the big guys say a couple times that, people bring in cups that are really like moldy, and that's just not okay. They can't legally use those. So we have to be mindful about our part too. But yeah.
But when you think about it, you're saving the restaurant owners some money, because they're not having to pay that extra cost for the 25-cent fee, which, by the way, they get to keep. And you're also not causing a tree somewhere to be sacrificed for or some kind of natural product to be sacrificed for your coffee of the moment. So,
well, and even if you ask for a China cup, it needs to be washed in a commercial. So, you're taking that piece onto yourself as well.
mm-hmm.
I was wondering if anybody here is going to do anything for the solstice, have any solstice plans. Is that something any of you have really thought much about or done things in the past? Barbara?
I haven't done much in the past, but I'm definitely gonna have a fireplace going tonight. And I have an assortment of candles in like a hammered metal tray. And I'm just going to have the house be dark for a while with the candles and the fire and, just a good time to contemplate.
That's a really age-old tradition that I think to me is as timely as ever. The darkening the house can be tricky because you start to realize how many things we have in the house, from your oven to your alarm clock to your your computer. Like, so many things have little lights, LEDs on them, and making it dark is kind of hard. And
Mhm.
going outside, often there's so much ambient light, especially if you live like I do downtown. It's hard to get dark, but you can get as dark as you can get. And then have there's something so magnetic and enchanting to humans about fire. Like, the moving flame just captures our minds. And I think using it almost as a meditation device, some meditations do use a candle, right? And really letting ourselves sort of sink into that meditative state and think about, or just not even think, just kind of be with the dark and the light. I think that's a beautiful part of the celebration for me. Rita, did you have something?
My daughter said she usually writes, oh, sorry, Laura, did I cut in front of you? She usually said she's going to write her intentions for next year. She always does that, usually on solstice. And I don't know if we're get a chance where it's, to have some candles or a fire lit. I don't know if we're going to get to do that tonight, but if I was home, I'd be building a big bonfire in my backyard. So that's
Yeah,
next year.
because it's so great when you can release your intentions or put stuff you're done with and write that out too. My
Right.
grandkids like to write it on birch bark. They make they paint and then you throw them into the fire and they shoot to the stars, or they are reduced to ashes. And it's this very satisfying way to, let go and get rid. Laura, did you want to say something?
Oh, yeah. Bonnie and I have always just done a ritual that we start on solstice, but it continues. But starting on solstice, we light a candle, and we're bringing back the light, and that's our thing. And so then every night we will do that. I don't know how long we do, probably till the candles go away. we get like big honking candles to do this with, and it's kind of just that daily reminder that the light's coming back, and it just lifts our spirits. And we started this when we were still living in Alaska, where it was, of course, a lot darker. But it's fun. But I always get just I'm more happy on solstice than Christmas, because to me this is it. This is the best.
I agree. I have a friend who lives in Willow, Alaska, and he makes these ice flowers with candles in them. He used to use battery, like, Christmas lights and stuff, but it's so cold that the batteries actually don't work when it gets to like 20 below or 30 below, which it does. But the ice works fine. So he's adapted to use candles, and he makes these beautiful ice flowers and fills his garden with them, and then has an open garden, and uses it as a fundraiser for the local library, which is kind of enchanting. But the pictures of that are so cool. And he started using food coloring a few years ago. So he makes these beautiful colored mixtures. And he said they freeze really fast, and makes them always with a jar or something in it. And you can pull that out and then have the pocket for the candles inside it, which I think is so really cool. Yeah.
I have fond associations with Willow. First, that was the first place I ever went dog mushing.
Oh.
And then I also attended with a friend the Willow Potato Festival, which was like, and we went in costume as potatoes.
Anyway. Oh, that's awesome. So last year, my friends almost got arrested because they had found this huge pile of moose turds and were using them to spell "help me" in the snow as sort of a joke, and put some antlers. And the ranger came by and was not amused at all, and tried to arrest them for public disturbance. But that's life in Willow. It's a little different, right? But yeah. I kind of love that. I haven't seen moose turds for quite a long time, but I recall them being about ping pong ball size and pretty round, right? Or like a shooter marble, kind of that size. You're muted, Laura. Wait.
Sorry about that. Yeah, user problems here. Yeah, they're kind of like nuggets. They're not round, so they're like jelly beans, but big jelly beans, like really big jelly beans. Anyway,
They make good writing material anyway, right?
yeah, yes, yeah, keychains, you know, you name it.
But I love the practice too of letting go of stuff and of thinking about things I'm done with, you know, in my life. And sometimes it's so interesting that when I do that, I find I don't actually have to give them up necessarily, but I've given up some part of them in some way. Like I'm really tired of, or like I really try to be more compassionate. I have times when I'm really judgy. I admit this, and I would like not to be so judgmental because I realize it's hard to have an actual conversation with somebody if you're being super judgmental at the time because you can feel it, right? And so trying to be more open-hearted and say, instead of saying, I really think you're a total nut job, you say, wow, that's an idea I've truly never thought of. Can you say a little more? And then really listen. Then I hear different things than when I come to it like, you know, right, not ready to hear this. So I'd really like to work on compassion this year and find some meaningful way to be a better listener to people that I don't want to hear, if that makes sense. Because, you know, I've been working with some of my friends like Akuye, Karen Vargas, and Debbie Hazy, who are brilliant at turning an argument into a conversation, whereas I'm pretty good at turning a conversation into an argument. And so trying to get into that different way of listening is something I'm going to be really working on for the next, probably the rest of my life, let's be clear. But yeah, that piece of it and writing that intention and then burning it, somehow that's really powerful. And the same with things I'm really hoping for. Like, you know, sometimes I do these intentions about peace and comfort. And sometimes I feel like I'm bludgeoning peace to death. It's like, peace, damn it, peace, peace, right? And that doesn't actually promote the kind of feeling I want either. So being a little less relentless, but trying to dream into it. And that's where the flame comes in for me, because I can kind of hold that thought of like, where does my mind rest? And where that's where peace really is. And it doesn't rest when I'm trying to tell it to do something or make it do something. I don't know if this really makes any sense, but it's how I'm thinking about today. Rita.
I was going to say, and the one other thing when we're kind of talking about this, is kind of like with the garden and all the stuff we want to do. I'm trying to think, if we think locally within our families and just there, it's just, you know, within our small community, say, and to start there. And if each person does that, it's amazing, because when you drop that little pebble into the water, the ripples are unbelievable. We can't, and I think sometimes we get so sidetracked with everything that seems so impossible to solve. But there have been so many big things that have been solved over the age of time that we can do our part and not get maybe too overwhelmed with everything and keep ourselves not too overwhelmed.
Yeah, one of my friends used to say, outcome is not up to you.
Right.
And I think about that a lot. Like, we can do our part. We can say what we need to say and do what we need to do, and then let it, just like planting seeds. You know, I don't know about you all, but my success rate is never 100%. And sometimes it's not even 1%. And maybe, you know, but the thing is, you don't know what's going on with those seeds, because there are seeds that take years to, like, some of them can lie fallow for decades. I did this really interesting job back in Seattle years and years ago, where we were renovating around an old Victorian house, and we took up the old sidewalk, which had been poured probably a good 100 years before. And then we're doing other parts of the garden, and where the sidewalk blocks had been, up came these annual flowers. There were columbines, there were some forget-me-nots, there were Clarkia, the farewell to spring. I'm trying to remember, there was like 6 or 7 kinds of annual flowers. The seeds had been lying there under that clunk of cement for 100 years, right? And when the time was right and the weight came off, and benign neglect kicked in because nobody raked it or did anything to it. We were going to work on it later. Up came these flowers, and I thought, oh, there's a life lesson in there somewhere, right? So maybe the letting go is taking the cement blocks off and finding out what's going to bloom in us instead, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Rita.
And as you said, you don't always have success with seeds, maybe zero, but you know what? We always have another chance. We always have another opportunity. And that's kind of, it's a new beginning, and every day is like that. And so here we go. So it didn't work the first time. Well, maybe we can do something a little different and make it work. Whatever it is.
In the garden, I really kind of got that brought home to me, because I used to, if something died, I would take the tag out. I always planted the tag next to the plant so that I could remember where I put stuff. But if it died, I would take the tag out. And then I started thinking, I have this feeling. And so I would leave the tag in and take the plant out if it died. And after a while, I realized it looked like a little mouse's graveyard. There were all these tags, and it was like, I have tried this plant in the same place 4 times and it's not happening. But I wouldn't have remembered that if I hadn't left the markers, right? But it's like reminding yourself of what you have tried. And yeah, sometimes persistence pays, and sometimes it's better to kind of try a new direction or a new tack, right? I was doing a consultation a couple of years ago, and there was this basically dead little rhododendron. And I was saying, oh, because she said, this doesn't look good. And I was like, no, it looks pretty dead. And she said, yeah, we've planted several of them here and they all do this. It's like, this might be a place for a pot, like a big container. If you want to do a rhododendron here on a clay slope with no drainage, then you could like cut out a little flat place and put it on a slab of some kind, and put a big pot on it, and then you can grow whatever you want right there. But sometimes you have to rethink your approach, right? If you want something really bad, you might have to change the way you make it happen, in the garden or out, right? Does anyone else here have a fireball that you're going to use tonight? Or I love those little fireball feet. You can just put them on bricks and stuff and do them in they don't take up much space. But there does seem something kind of wonderful to me about sharing. And I'm thinking, in my little neighborhood, I'm going to do it out in my parking strip, and I'm just going to invite a few of the neighbors if they want to stop by. We can burn something together. Seems like kind of a fun way to. Do you want to come over and burn something with me, right? Francis.
This is just a comic little comment talking about fireballs. I was in the Red Plantation shop in Paulsbo, and they have, it's a wonderful shop to walk through just because it's so Christmassy. It really gets you into the spirit. But they actually had these little miniature fireballs, I guess, and you would use a little tea candle, and then little tiny forks for roasting miniature marshmallows.
Oh my goodness.
And instructions how to take a small piece of the cracker, and they suggested little chocolate drops rather than big hunks of chocolate, and how to make your s'mores.
Oh, that's awesome.
I know. I think it was like $40.
Whoa.
But it would also be a funny gag gift, I guess. But I thought, well, you make it just a little bit bigger, you can throw the wiener on it.
Right? Those Vienna sausages.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh, that's hilarious. I could see having that in somebody's fairy house or something, right? Incidentally, someone has made little Christmassy fairy houses down in that Holly Park on the water down off Holly. If you go down below the ferry and go around, there's access down there, and there's some really sweet little garden fairy houses in there. And that's kind of a fun thing to do. If any part of your yard abuts a public way that, there are neighbors walking by, it's fun to do like a little fairy house thing out where people can see it if kids are in the neighborhood or not. We have new neighbors here who are from Venezuela, and they came as political refugees and were granted asylum and sent to Florida first, but they found there was a lot of racism in Florida. So they came here and are living with a neighbor. And they're two twin boys who are about, I think they're 8, and they have never seen snow. So this is so fun because they are loving it, and they're loud boys. I mean, little boys generally are, but it's so fun to hear them just like shrieking with delight and roaring with laughter. And I'm thinking, every neighborhood should have kids where you can hear kids having a good time and being outside and just reveling in the snow. It's so sweet. But I'm sort of enchanted at the idea of somebody who's never seen snow getting experience. And the other kids, of course, are like, here's how you make a snowball splat. Wow.
Well, I have children sliding on cardboard and handmade sleds and everything down. We have a nice long slope of lawn, churches in back of me. And I love it, as you said, hearing the laughter and sometimes a naughty word if they crash with a couple of older boys, but they're having such a good time and they don't seem to care. There's a fence around one of those holding ponds or whatever they call them, and sometimes they'll run into that. They don't care, they get up and go again. But I love the creative way they find things to slide on. If they don't have a sled or an inner tube, they have cardboard boxes. One kid had a garbage can lid. It's just whatever works.
Yeah, just like a flying saucer, right? I mean,
yeah, right.
I think I remember hearing that flying saucers were developed because of garbage can lids. Anyway, yeah, I think that's so inventive, and that's what people used to do, right? Sleds, you have to build them, right? And a lot of times kids didn't have them, but I remember people sledding on trays, like metal trays sometimes.
TV trays, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and now you don't see garbage lids, or these. I don't know how folks had it. Maybe they had it for refuse or something, but so many of our garbage, at least here in Paulsbo, the garbage are plastic canisters. The lids don't come off.
Oh, right, they're
the
bins.
round cans very often, but he had a plastic round green lid, pretty good size.
Everyone's got a cardboard box in their life somewhere, right? Hey, Reed, we're discussing make your own sled.
Great. I completely forgot about the time. I still have another hour and 20 minutes before the solstice though.
Right. Exactly. And so in an hour and 20 minutes, we can all gather around our candles. Francis was telling us there are miniature fireballs that you can in tiny, tiny forks, and you can roast one of those mini marshmallows over it if you can't have an outdoor fire experience. I thought that sounded really sweet. In the mobile home park, we're not allowed to have real candles indoors, but we can have them outdoors along the street. So I'm going to put my little row of candles out there tonight too, because I think that's kind of sweet to see the little flames flickering in the night. Right?
Do you do like luminarias? Do you put them in bags?
Yeah, though we found, it's so wet that paper bags don't really work very well, but big cans, like those kind of Costco cans, you can use the old-fashioned can openers that makes a triangle shape, and you can go around the rim and both ends of that and take the top and bottom off,
idea.
and that, or even just the top off, and then that makes kind of a decorative little can that even if it's soaking wet, it doesn't, melt into the landscape. But yeah.
So you had a picture you wanted me to share and I couldn't figure out what that was about. And then it dawned on me that it was for this.
Yes, it was for this. It was a Twitter post that I saw this morning from Nature magazine. And this is what scientists do when they're not able to get out to the real Stonehenge. This is called Bookhenge.
Oh, I love it.
Isn't that great?
And all they need is a miniature fireball to go with it.
Yeah, a little fireball sitting right in there. And I love that these are romance novels, right?
Is that what they are?
Well, I see somebody with a steamy kiss over there, so I guess
Oh,
yeah.
lighting the flames of love on the cold solstice seems like an appropriate thing to do. But I just felt like this was pretty sweet and a fun way to line up that first light of the day, right?
Perfect.
Thank you, Reed. Well, anybody got anything else?
Anne, could I just ask, I
Sure.
have a balcony, a south-facing balcony. Nothing grows out there except ornamental grass and a grapevine that I've had out there for probably 10 years in a big container. I've never trimmed that thing. I mean, I don't know when you cut branches off a grapevine, but it occurred to me as I went out there and almost got poked in the eye by a twig coming off it, that I should probably find out when I should cut branches back. Can you tell me if this is a good time to do that?
It's not really because of the freezing temperatures. So the plant will kind of bleed and lose a lot. But if you wait a little bit and start like middle of February, that would be a much better time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And the pruning of grapevine in a home setting is not the same as what they do in the, in the vineyards where they're actually pruning specifically for high productivity of the grape and stuff like that. But once the year starts to develop, you'll see where the new shoots are coming and you can cut them back. There's some pretty good YouTubes online if you want to get a idea of how to cut back to a framework. But in most situations like that where it's kind of informal, I would just take off anything that poked me in the eye.
That's what I want to do. Yeah.
Well,
But
it's
now
your
it's not.
you're not working for productivity maximizing. And so you can just take it back to the shape that works best for your environment and not worry about it. But I would wait until the weather's a little more settled. Like you want it to be really in the 40s consistently, even at night.
So a couple of months.
Yeah. But on the other hand, I will also say, if that stick offends you, you can just cut it off right now and not worry about it.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that.
Yeah. I have a big jasmine that blooms abundantly every winter, but I'm not so sure it's going to this winter because it looks kind of hammered. And I was just thinking this, when a plant looks terrible, that's a good time to take it back and prune everything off that looks awful. And we don't usually think about it until it starts to refurbish and going, oh gosh, I wish I'd taken all those
That's
off.
yeah.
Right.
That's how I do it.
Yeah. But if I'm if the weather was a little nicer, I'd take it outdoors, hose it off, and then take all the dead bits and funky stuff off and cut it back to a framework. But in your situation, just take off anything that's really, a threat to your eyes and call it good.
Well, I try to be nice to the hummingbirds. They like to.
They do.
Sit on
I've
the
noticed
branch.
we have a big fatsias which is an ivy relative with those big sort of palm-like leaves and big sprays of white balls with little flowers on them. They look very sort of odd, but the hummingbirds are all over them and they're nesting in there. And they're as soon as it's warm enough and light enough, they're all over those flowers because so many other things got creamed, but those are still producing nectar apparently, which is kind of great.
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of hummingbirds here.
Anybody else got anything?
Oh, just a quick
Laura.
question.
Sure.
Yeah, we've got rosemaries and they've got flowers on them and the hummingbirds are there. Are they getting anything or are they just being frustrated?
No, they're getting
good.
something.
Good.
And a lot of rosemaries are winter blooming.
Yeah.
Particularly the northern ones like ARP, and so they won't keep coming if they're not getting anything out of it.
Okay.
Yeah. So right, anything that blooms, and a lot of times the herbs bloom really a long time, and there's still some roses, confused roses that will do a little bit of late blooming, and they still produce a little bit of nectar, and some of that feverfew, the little daisy flowers, those still have nectar and pollen. So I never cut remnants off until spring because of that, like for the hummingbirds and any other birds too. And, the crazy few bees that emerge at the wrong time, you got to have something for them. And, pretty soon we're going to start having blooms on all the Oregon grape and things like that. And then the hummingbirds will be all over those too. Are we good?
Mhm.
All right.
Thank you, Ann.
Happy solstice,
you.
everybody.